Welcome, everybody. Happy Wednesday. I'm Elizabeth Hamblet. I am the author of 7 Steps to College Success, a pathway for students with disabilities, which may or may not be backwards. It looks backwards to me. Anyway, I am so delighted to be here today with some of my favorite podcast hosts. If you have not listened to the Learn Smarter podcast, get on that today, sign up. Get on their email list. These are 2 very, very smart people, educational therapists who are kind enough to share their strategies and ideas with folks through their podcast. So I'm going to take just a moment and ask these women to introduce themselves. I like alphabetical order because I'm that kind of nerd. So Rachel, could you go first?
Just so you know, we had to make that decision when we started the podcast on whose name would be first.
And
right?
both her first name and last name go before mine. So
that if anybody's ever wondered why it's in that order, excuse me, it's alphabetical. So my name is Rachel Kapp. I am a board certified educational therapist. And like you said, I co-host the Learn Smarter podcast, the educational therapy podcast. We have over 250 episodes on various topics relating to educational therapy, including author series, which Elizabeth has been featured on, and executive functioning series and writing series, math and reading and all the good stuff. And we initially started the podcast. Well, I should also say that I am the owner of Kapp Educational Therapy Group, which is in Beverly Hills, California, and virtually everywhere. We specialize in learners with executive functioning skills challenges and/or an ADHD diagnosis. And Steph and I met in school, and we knew that we wanted to work on a project together. And we knew we wanted to work on a project together that expanded awareness and access to educational therapy because it is local to certain communities and certain regions in the United States. And we also wanted to provide broader access to families who couldn't afford services or couldn't get access to an ed therapist. At the time that we were sort of conceiving of the podcast, virtual ed therapy wasn't something that was really happening. Obviously, it's much more prevalent now in both of our practices. And so that's how we initially started the podcast back in 2018, I think.
2018.
So, Steph, why don't you share a little bit about yourself?
Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Stephanie Pitts, and I co-host Learn Smarter as well. I have a private practice called My Ed Therapist, and we are in Manhattan Beach and Redondo Beach, California, and virtually as well. And we work with kindergarten all the way through adult, helping them with anything and everything you can imagine that you might be struggling with. So here we are. And, after 250 episodes, we have really learned a lot. And one of the reasons, not only about access to educational therapy, but we wanted to learn more than we learned in our program when we were in school. So we started interviewing and doing all of these episodes with all of these amazing professionals. And that's one of the reasons why we were able to meet Elizabeth and start a relationship about all the different things and the way the services and things that can help learners throughout the different stages of school, college, work, life, all the things. So here we are today.
I'll add something to that. One of the beautiful byproducts of the podcast is, yes, it's given us absolutely broader access to people like you, Elizabeth, or leaders in the fields, authors who are willing to give us their time and wouldn't have otherwise been probably willing. So we've been able to forge these really great connections. But the other thing is we have so many episodes where it's just Steph and I talking, and you get to hear 2 ed therapists sort of chatting about an idea, and we're chatting about below deck, whatever we're talking about that day. And and one of the things that we've talked about is that having the podcast has really forced us to think what we think about things. So it has given us an opportunity to be reflective, to learn from each other, to sort of talk through things with each other. One of our most popular series is our client success series, where we bring on current or former clients that we've individually worked with. And because Steph and I have always been so collaborative, even though our two businesses are separate, and the only place we really overlap in a real like business way is the podcast, I still know about all her clients, and she still knows about all my clients. And so it gave us the opportunity to meet each other's clients, and our audience has really enjoyed those episodes because it's the students and learners themselves reflecting back. And that's been a great learning opportunity for us as well. So I'm immensely grateful for what the podcast has offered to our audience and has offered to us as well.
Well, and collaboration is so nice. And I, in the interest of full disclosure, I was a fan before I was a guest and continue to be a fan. So as a fan, let me use your signature phrase. Let's dig in.
Okay.
I have been posting all week this week. I put together my college readiness social media post series because I think, part of what my function as a professional is to alert families and professionals to what students can and can't expect in the way of supports and services at the college level. And what that also means is that there is a need and to make sure that students are as prepared as possible for college, which means being ready to do without some of those structures and supports that students have been accustomed to. So, you ladies do work with a wide range of ages. And so right now, what I'm interested in asking you about is, what are you seeing in the college students that you are working with, and maybe those you didn't get a chance to work with before they started? What are they struggling with? And, more importantly, what are the kinds of things you are having them do?
So I'll jump in and say the first thing that we really notice from learners who are in college is the time management piece. So time management is a huge component of executive functioning skills, and something that we've talked about extensively on the podcast and with you, Elizabeth, is that their sense of time awareness as well. So what we know about learners who struggle with executive functioning skills is that they often have something called time blindness, and they do not feel time the same way you or I feel time. So along with time management, maybe not as nice way of talking about it is procrastination, but really what it is, it's an overestimation or an underestimation and an avoidance of how long something will take them. Another thing that we really see that coming into play with is study skills and writing strategies. Those are two areas where learners really struggle. Steph, what would you add?
I was going to say, we recently had a client of mine in the Client Success Stories series come on, and her name is Nikki, and she actually started with me in high school and is now a sophomore in college. And one of the things that she came on and she talked about was the ability to do all the living things as well. Making sure she had food, making sure she had clean clothes, being able to know when and how you're going to make those things happen is a struggle. And before, when you're in high school, those things are sort of done for you, or there is a time structure to make sure that these things happen. And so when they get on their own and it's this free world, so to speak, of how are they going to make sure that they get done what they need to get done, making sure that all happens simultaneously is a definite struggle. And so one or the other tends to lack some attention. So meaning like the personal life stuff or the school life, like it seems that being able to do both is really challenging, and they only have so much gas in their gas tank, so to speak. And so that is one of the things that I think that, we always say the two biggest transitions in school are from elementary to middle school, and high school to college. Those are the two biggest jumps in executive functioning needs and expectations throughout a child's life. And it becomes really hard. How do you go to class when you don't have any clothes? How do you do your homework when you're hungry?
Yeah.
So everything starts to affect everything else. And sometimes it's not just about being able to start or get it done. You don't have the charger to your computer to be able to charge your computer in order to do your assignment. Like, all of these things play a huge role in being able to get done what you need to get done when you need to get it done.
And I think, it's interesting. I interviewed these two college autism experts for the book, and recently that video is on YouTube if you are looking for that. And I think it was my friend Jane who said something like, we're very good at teaching, and they were specifically talking about kids with autism, but I think it's probably more generally true, getting kids to be good at school, but they have to be good at everything in college. And look, good is relative, right? I mean,
of course,
there are lots of college students who are neurotypical, who have smelly socks, who are eating junk, in their dorm rooms and not getting.
And keep in mind that there is some level of structure, right? Because there's a meal plan, but there's that added component of, like, you have to get to the meal hall or the food hall, whatever it's called on your campus, in
when
the window
open.
that it's when it's open, and you have class at a certain time, and you have to allot for how much time you need to walk between, and do you need to bring your backpack with you, and all those sorts of things.
And
those are all
find your
executive
ID
functioning.
card, right?
Have your ID card on you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think too, it's counterintuitive. I work, for those who don't know me, I work with students in a college disability services office, and time management is certainly something I work with them on. And the way I approach it, and I'd love to hear from you ladies, is we set up a weekly template, essentially a schedule for them to follow that accounts for the time that they need for each class, accounts for getting the laundry done, accounts for if they want to do workouts and all of this stuff. But when I first do this with students and I ask them to, think about where has their time gone in the last week, because when we start by plugging in just weekly obligations, classes, any meetings, rehearsals, practices, whatever, sleeping, and they look at this grid of the week and they can see how many hours in a week they have, they're stunned. But I think it's counterintuitive. The more time you have, the harder it is to use it well.
Because you feel like it's free flowing. You have more.
Right.
No, you have 3 hours in between class. Right. As opposed to going from classes. You don't have class on a certain day, which was always my ideal schedule, not to have Friday classes. Right.
I love when you talk about yourself as a student, Rachel. So that's some of my favorite stuff.
I had a good time in college. I had a good time. And you know what? I think that was valuable to me after the middle school and high school academic experience that I had, which has been very intense. But I had a good time in college. I was ready for it. No.
Stephanie, you were going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say that, that I think one of the things also that I have worked with my client that came on the podcast is making sure that she had fun. And that was something that was really important. She also, like so many of us, and I went to a hard high school as well, that we were burnt out. And
especially now.
Oh yeah. But she was not able to was struggling with having a balance, right? And I wanted to make sure, like in high school, she really struggled with the balance. And so in college, when she started to struggle with the balance, I wanted to prioritize that as well. With, it doesn't need to be perfection. Let's have some outside experiences to really get a sense of what she wants to do, and go on that semester abroad and do all the things and volunteer at the clubs that you want to do, but make sure that it is in moderation, so that it doesn't take over everything and you can't get all the other things done. So figuring out a balance of being able to enjoy, but also be able to be successful in what you need to do in the classroom and outside of the classroom is really hard. And remember, your prefrontal cortex is still not developed completely. So being able to
which is
manage
where
all those-
executive functioning skills
Right.
are in the brain. Go on, Steph. Sorry.
So being able to manage all of that is extremely hard. So I think that's one of the reasons why we often see kids that don't get to have any fun or have too much fun.
Right. And actually, I think that's a great point. I think some students, don't do anything because they think I have to work all the time. But actually, life is so much easier if you plug those meetings and those clubs in. Then it structures your time. You have a little bit better sense of when you need to get things done. One of your episodes, I love, one of my favorites. This is what I want to ask too about your advice for your students in college. You talked about the importance of systems.
Yeah.
So do you have systems you recommend for college students?
Yeah, and it's really not that much different.
I was going to say, it's just systems for studenting.
It's the systems of life, let's just say. So
yeah.
There are three main systems, and excuse me, I'm going to take a sip of my coffee and the coffee mug that Steph got me.
That's her color, a little bit more my color.
Oh, okay.
So there are three main systems to sort of consider. You need a system of time management, a system for organizing yourself digitally, and a system for organizing yourself physically. Every learner, every adult, every college student needs those three systems. Now, let me put this caveat in. A lot of kids or learners who struggle with executive functioning systems are actually not bad at creating systems. They love a new app. They love they love going to Staples.
Can you be clear about what we mean by systems?
You be clear. I don't know what you're asking me.
Okay. So
that's what's so much fun about this podcast.
So when she's saying like systems, she's saying like a calendar, or she's saying knowing, like sitting down and figuring out time beforehand. Like, I'm going to do this every Sunday. I'm going to figure out what I need to do. Or I know that like my things are all in Google Docs. Or she means systems to like actually make sure that things are where they're supposed to be, digitally and physically. So I just wanted to clarify that's what you meant.
Thank you. That is what I mean. So I don't mean to overcomplicate it. And I will say that Steph and I are absolutely tech forward about this kind of stuff. We're not a big fan of paper. Students lose it. If you can't automate it, there's all sorts of things and they're frankly more comfortable digitally as well. And so like I said, they're great at creating these systems, some of them, or they get really jazzed and excited. Where they lose their luster, or where they lose the gas in the tank, as Steph would say, is that they're not great at maintaining those systems. So, and those systems require maintenance, which actually doesn't take that much time throughout the day. But Steph and I, we live and die by our calendar, right? I showed up on time to this because my calendar told me to. And I don't remember like making the plan to come and do this at 9 a.m., but I'm here on time, right? So one of the realistic expectations around systems is that the maintenance piece is actually takes less time, but is going to be harder to get your learner to do independently, which is where Ed Therapy steps in and sort of provides that higher level of accountability for our learners. So we give them a list. These are all the things that need to be on your calendar weekly. And actually this conversation has sparked an idea that we should create a calendar checklist for our college age student staff. So look out for that episode coming in 6 to 9 months. And
I want a shout out for that one.
You'll get one. And we'll input everything, but then the first 5 to 10 minutes of each session after those systems are created, those rules around things like Steph was talking about, like we're not going to put things in Word because it's not searchable as easy as it is searchable in Google Docs. And kids also don't label what the doc is, like everything's just like Word, right? And so when you search a keyword in Google or in a Google Doc, it pops right up for you. So
Oh.
so you create these rules about where they're going to put things
Mhm.
so that their future selves don't have to make a ton of decisions about stuff. We
Mhm.
want to mitigate. So we're not talking about complicated systems. We're talking about the simpler, the better. We want to prevent our learners from going into stylized things. Like we're big fans of Google Calendar. And one of the fun parts of Google Calendar is you can really play around with colors. And learners who struggle with executive functioning skills love to do that type of stuff. But that's secondary to getting the content in there, right? So it's about creating the rules, creating those systems, and then maintaining them with the understanding that it takes time and persistence and usually a higher level of accountability. Hopefully not the parent is doing that. In order for those systems to become more automated, with the ultimate goal of learners are checking those systems, they're checking their calendar before making a commitment to something.
Yeah. And I want to put in there that, there's two ways of sort of doing that and knowing what kind of person you are. There's some kids, for instance, I'll give you an example. If you have an appointment or you need to put something in or something changes or your class changes or whatever, are you putting it in real time? Like, oh, I just found this out, I'm going to put it in now because I'm going to forget later. Or are you the person that, okay, in a half hour or hour, when I sit down to like manage my calendar for the day, I have a note that like, I'm going to change this. My preference is in real time, but that doesn't always work for everybody. So figuring out what and how you're going to be able to do that so that you don't forget that, oh, my class is in a different room or something this week because the building is getting demolished or whatever. So I think that those moments are so important. And what is the best? I have clients that refuse to use a digital calendar. Refuse. Okay, fine. I'll just take what I can get. We have paper. But if we have paper, then I want it to be a good one. So there are some really bad planners out there, and there are some really good ones. So knowing within that, how are you going to manage and what are you going to do to be successful?
So we're starting to get some questions, and I'm guessing that, one of the things when you say there's some good planners out there, we will not disparage the bad planners, but do you have that, like, is there a name brand of a planner that you like?
There's a couple that I like. Erin Condren's planners are really good. And also
Erin, E-R-I-N?
ERINCONDREN.
I think DREN, yes.
Okay.
She's a local to Manhattan Beach, actually.
Okay.
Is she?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the other one I really like is Plum Paper.
Okay.
Those are really great. You can, with Plum Paper, you can actually make it individualized. You can put different things and write it in, and then it'll auto-populate it for all the pages.
So let me ask you, but I'm pretending that we're podcasting here, Steph.
Yeah.
Because I'm not using paper calendars with clients. Are you, when you are moving into a paper calendar, and again, our preference and Steph's preference absolutely is
100%
a digital calendar, because it's smooth across all platforms, we can automate it, all the things. Are you wanting them to get a weekly, a Sunday through Saturday? Are you wanting a monthly? How much space do learners need? How big does it have to be? Those types of I think specific questions.
That's the beauty of the Plum Paper ones, or the different varieties of what they need. There's little boxes of like, here's things to remember if you want, and it's weekly, but it has a monthly view. I don't really like them to use the monthly view because they don't look at both.
Right. And I want to caution people, know who you are if you're going to go down that Plum Paper path, because that would be something that for me, I would get in the weeds about and I would overthink. And what would ultimately happen is I would text Steph and say, which one? Right. and you make the decision for me because it's too many options for me. So I know that I only need at most 3 options for something. So when
Yes.
something gives me more, it puts me into a state of overwhelm. The best thing is just to kind of move forward, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm the opposite. I'll take
Yeah.
all the options and I know exactly what I want.
Yeah.
So,
I-
anyway, but like I said, this is one of those things that, you know, some kids don't have access to anything digital in real time at school. Some schools don't allow it. Some
Mhm.
schools do. So it just depends. And that's, you know, a little bit more middle high school than college, really.
Right,
But
right.
if I had the choice for a college student, I would absolutely have them do digital, because what do they always have on them?
Mhm.
Their phones.
And
They
I have-
always have their phones, and it's there.
I have some students who do use digital, but then they also have a whiteboard or a physical calendar up in their dorm room or apartment of big deadlines coming up. Because one thing about digital, then I was going to say, the calendar is only as good as you are about checking it.
Correct.
And so do you encourage them to make sure that there are pop-ups for upcoming events? You know,
You're saying like event reminders?
yeah,
that
like,
sort
so
of
you
thing?
got here today. Was there a pop-up yesterday for you about today, or?
No.
Okay.
Well,
But
no,
also, I'm incredibly good at looking forward, and every night before I go to bed, I'm like, okay, what's on the schedule for tomorrow, because my schedule fluctuates from day to day, and I'm also a parent. So
Right.
like I have to have my life sort of structured in this way.
yeah,
But I
don't-
don't think
yeah.
it's a realistic expectation for every learner to
Right.
do have that skill set
Mhm.
when they are in the phase of creating and maintaining their calendars.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, well, Steph, I'm curious what you would say, because I know how
Well,
I'd respond.
Well, okay. So one of the things that is, when you have really good executive functioning skills or have honed them to what works for you, is to be able to forward plan and scan, right? I
Mhm.
spend an incredible amount of time scanning my forward calendar, knowing what's coming up, so I have an
Plan and
idea.
scan, I like that.
So, but
Yeah, it's a
here's
good
the thing.
phrase. Let's do an episode on that stuff.
I did that. That was my old job. That was like one of my main
Right.
jobs
Right.
in that job, was that I had to do that. But when you're talking about things in real time, and that, oh, I remember in the morning, I know that this afternoon I need to do, you know, I need to go to the dentist, but then I don't look at the calendar, and then by the time the afternoon comes, I've already forgotten. I'm already on to the next thing,
Mhm.
or thinking
Yep.
about what I get to do after school. Okay. So it really, honestly, it depends on what type of learner they are, because some kids, they really depend on those reminders, those pop-ups. Okay. I have some kids that think they depend on them, but then just ignore them. So it's not actually working.
Sure.
There's some kids that I literally make them put reminders, as in like alarms that go off.
Mhm.
And it goes off. And the beauty of a smartphone is that you can have it go off certain days at certain times and have
Yeah.
it repeating automatically.
Yep.
So I have a student, for instance, who has really struggling getting out the door. So she has alarms set. This has to be done by the time this alarm goes off. This has to be done by the time the next alarm goes off. And there are several of them within a 45-minute span. And that has been a game changer for her to actually get out the door. So it depends on, I don't want to say that, listen, I'm always the person that's like, whoa, okay, but it really does depend on the learner and figuring out. And this is a little bit of a guess and check game, to be honest, right? You need to see what systems don't work and why, and which ones work and why. So I wouldn't say it's a one size fits all. Yes, do it. Don't do it. It really, whatever you choose, you need to stick to. That is my biggest, like Rachel and I are always, once you've chosen an essay topic, you don't get to pivot. You need to stay the course, because all the pivoting is what's sucking up time. And so if you choose and you're going to try to do something, let's give it a good try before we start to pivot.
This is why educational therapy intervention is not a quick fix, Because in this process, we sort of know they need a system for managing their time. What that system turns into is very responsive to what is happening with them. And so do you
and who they are.
And who they are. And that takes us time to sort of give them some feedback. That gives them time to sort of get the language around all this stuff. And also takes a certain level of vulnerability and trust on both sides to kind of have these productive conversations. So nothing that we're talking about today is a quick fix. We do not want people pivoting too quickly. 1 or 2 failures of executive functioning skills does not mean forever failure. And we need to pivot immediately and sort of solve the problem immediately, because it's not realistic. But sometimes a little tweak, which I think is what Steph is referring to, can be the game changer. And it's different. This is why we have such creative jobs. It's different per student.
Just following up to, somebody asked a question about calendars. My assumption, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you're just talking about using the calendars already built into their devices, right? G Calendar, Google Calendar, or iCalendar.
We're always nothing fancy, and we're always going to skew towards Google.
And so for those of you who have not seen it on my YouTube channel, a couple of weeks ago, I did a talk with a college assistive tech specialist. And one of the things that he talked about is all of the tools built into the devices your students already have that they can be leveraging to help themselves. You really don't, with a couple of exceptions, there are a lot of things that your students need that they already have. And it's an overwhelming thing to figure it out. But, do a Google search for Apple accessibility tools, and you often don't need a fancy app for anything.
And it's often free. And we have done several episodes on how to calendar like a pro, how to respond to learner, like the 4 main reasons why learners don't want a calendar, and how to sort of respond to it. So we have talked about calendaring a lot.
I would love to make sure I get those under this in the YouTube channel. If you know, to send me I mean, I know I've listened to them. There's so much wonderful material. I can't remember them all. Here's a really interesting question. How do you help students with dyslexia and executive functioning deficits overcome overwhelm? If a very intelligent high school student gets overwhelmed where there is learning overload, don't do this to me, Facebook. Sorry, it was popped it. Okay. If a student gets overwhelmed when there's a learning overload, how do you help them prepare for the heavy college load? It's a tricky one.
Well, I'm going to first start out by saying, know your learner. If your learner is not ready for a heavy college load, then they're not ready. And does that mean taking a gap year or gap situation, or starting out at community college, and not taking as many classes, or knowing that it's going to be a 6-year plan, then that's fine too. So I want to preface it with, I don't want to put students in a situation where they're not going to succeed, because once they fail, it's much harder to get them to go back. So setting them up for success is the most important. And that means if they're getting overwhelmed with high school stuff, they're definitely going to get overwhelmed with college stuff. Yes. So knowing how to mitigate some of the overwhelm now and getting those systems in place and making sure, are they spending 6 hours studying what they already know? And then that's a time suck and they can't do all the other things. Well, you don't need to study what you already know. That's just an example. There's a lot of time being spent that they don't realize on things that they don't necessarily really need to be doing. And that's one of the things that we really hone in on, helping them learn smarter.
Yeah. The thing that I would also add is that when a learner is in crisis, which sounds like these overwhelming situations build up, it's not the moment to try to have a rational, reasonable conversation about what they could have done.
Oh, fair
It's not
enough.
going to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
productive.
Oh, you mean be a
Mhm.
parent?
Yes,
Mhm.
yes. And
I've never done that. I've never.
it's so hard as a parent because, by the way, you're watching the train wreck happen. Like,
Mhm.
you know what's going to happen. And sometimes that happens with us as well. Like,
Mhm.
and we have to give some leeway and we get very emotionally invested. And we're like, this is what we're predicting if you continue down
This
this
is
path,
where you're
right?
going. Yep.
And this is what I predict will happen. I'm going to give an example of a learner who I worked with for a couple of years, and she's a college student now. And writing assignments were always the thing. And it was an 11 o'clock Sunday night, and she would go into her parents' room crying, and they would do the right thing for the moment, which is help her write it. Like, they'd sit down, they'd be working on this thing that had been built up for weeks and weeks and weeks, and they didn't know about it until the night before it was due, right? Because she was trying to manage it. When learners are in overwhelm, I guarantee their compensatory strategies and their compensatory systems are not properly set up, but
Mhm.
they don't know what they don't know. They don't know how to do it. So when, for example, a learner is coming into educational therapy, let's say we're in April now, right? Realistically, we're going to be sort of in a crisis management phase until the end of the year. But then we have summer, because I want to be honest about the impact that we can make,
Yeah.
right? And it's also the impact that parents can make. We have summer to sort of build out these compensatory strategies and systems. And then they go into the fall and these things don't happen again. And they might happen in a little way, right? And when they start to feel that overwhelm, what happens is they get triggered and parents get triggered. And then we get the email and the call, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
But it's actually not the same thing that was happening before. This is a muscle that we're
Mhm.
building up for these kids. And they have a lot of experience feeling overwhelmed. That muscle's very strong.
Mhm.
So getting them to the point of that sort of like preventative behavior, that's going to take time and incremental change, and us sort of defining what a victory is for a learner as well.
Mhm.
Mhm.
No quick fixes.
Mm-mm.
And one of them, and I do believe you talked about this too in one of the episodes, is, again, for those of you watching, I'm here to represent the college end of this transition. It's pretty unusual. Again, I don't have statistics there. It's something I try to rely on, but I don't have any. But being in this college community that I am, it's not common for students to get extensions for papers.
Right.
With ADHD, with LD, with autism. You can read my book to learn more about who gets it, but it's very unusual to get it. And often if it's approved for somebody, it's a student with either a mental health or physical condition that has unpredictable flare-ups. And in that time of a flare-up, they might get a few extra days. They don't even get, every time a paper is assigned, they get 3 extra days. So papers and deadlines are something I so commonly see come up in my community as something that students expect to have, and the high schools are doing it for students, and we are not at the college level.
And I will say that sometimes high schools are because teachers are trying to help. So
Right.
sometimes it's
Yes.
not a formal accommodation,
Mhm.
but every
Oh,
student
good
knows.
point. Right.
Every student knows what you can get away with and with which teacher, to the point that there have been several times where I have gotten involved with late high school student and have reached out with full permission from everybody's on the same team, including the student, where I said, we need to now have firm deadlines. Thank you for being so flexible, but from here on out, they need to feel the consequences of that deadline. And everybody has to be on the same page about it. And sometimes that can take a little bit of time for the learner because everybody gets a little panicky about it, and for the parents. But I will say that is not the first step in educational therapy. That is something where we are pushing them and moving them towards independence, or they are ready and they're right there. And we just need to give them a little more pushback and structure around it to get them to the point where, no, a deadline is a deadline.
And, my experience too is at the college level, when I have had students who have advocated for themselves directly with the professor. And, again, not as an accommodation, but just ask. And a professor, look, any professor can tell any student that they can have an extension. That's down to their decision. But often I have students that then they blow the next deadline because, what they are doing is delaying the procrastination. And that is, that whole task initiation and completion is part of executive functioning. And so that's something I'd love to ask you about. One of the things I find my college students struggling with so much is motivation. And I know you guys did a great episode on that, but like how, when your student has an assignment that they're not interested in, that they don't like, and they still have to do it, are there any tricks you give them for getting started?
Accountability. I'm going to say accountability, right? Like that's going to be the biggest thing, because if that means that they decide that they get their roommate or a friend in college, okay, we're going to go sit down and study, and I'm going to do the thing that I hate to do, and please help make sure that I do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that takes a very high level of self-awareness.
Yeah, and you have to be ready for it and know to ask for it and know which things you are putting off because you think you have more time, you think you have less time. What is getting activated when you know that the deadline is coming?
Right, that activation. Yeah.
Right. So knowing and creating deadlines, like, for instance, my student that needs multiple alarms in the morning just to, okay, by this time, teeth need to be brushed. By this time, I need to be dressed. This time I need to have eaten breakfast. Those alarms are creating the activation in little segments for her. So really getting down to, this is educational therapy. Who are you as a learner, as a person, as a student, as a functional human being, in the workforce or whatever it is? What works for you and what doesn't?
Right.
And
that's so
knowing how to use a strategy in the moment takes a lot of time to figure out which strategies work and when. There's no one size fits all. So this is why educational therapy is also the long game, because it takes so long to figure out, as Rachel, has said in the past, like it's throwing spaghetti at the wall. Okay, let's try this. Nope, that didn't work. All right, let's try this. So it's really being able to come up with a system that will work for you so that you know that you can't fall back and not do the thing that you're supposed to do, because that's easy. What were you gonna say, Rach?
I would also add that students will do things that they perceive to be easy. Because so for the most part, right? And I will say that Steph and I come from a fundamental place and a fundamental belief that all learners want to please. Learners want to please their parents. They want to please their teachers. They want to please their professors and their grad student instructors, which is what we call TAs where I went to school. So we're coming from that place. When they can, they will. And when they're not, it's our job to get curious. And so with a college age student who is avoidant of an assignment, it's probably because they don't understand the assignment so well. So getting into the mode of self-advocacy, going to office hours, which is incredibly difficult for this generation of learners who won't even call to place an order for pizza. Like if they can't do it on an app, they're not going to do it. So this is that muscle that takes some time, but a great strategy, if your learner is willing to do it, is as soon as something gets assigned, go to office hours, talk to your TA about it, get some clarity around it.
Yeah. And I'm going to add also, the thing that we also teach learners who are doing homework daily is to start with the hardest thing. They often start with the easiest thing because, then I can just get it off my plate. Well, you're using gas that you need for a harder assignment. And so it's teaching them how to flip how they're thinking about something that they don't really need a lot of thought and process and gas, so to speak, for an easy assignment. They can just get it done. So that could be the easy thing at the end of the night or whenever they're done with their homework that day. So all of these little strategies, when you start adding them on top of each other,
Right.
that is where you see the success.
And just to add, because I think the office hours piece is a good one. There is a great piece by NPR that I've just put into the comments about how to make office hours less scary.
Office hours is scary. And I was
Yeah.
a student that was comfortable talking to professors for the most, or to people, very intimidated about going to office hours.
But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on Stephanie. I was so excited about this, to remember this thing. But I think, yeah, the adding things up, but it takes time, as you keep saying. So this brings me to a question I had sent to you. It's obviously easier for students if they are accustomed to all of this stuff before they go. I think, parents love their kids. Parents do everything they can to be helpful and supportive. What are some things that you have seen parents do that gets in the way of their students developing executive functioning? And what do you recommend for them?
Okay. You have to be willing to tolerate failure.
Sorry.
So by handing over executive functioning to their learner, the ultimate goal is really that you want, as a parent, to move from being the manager to being the consultant. To not letting the online portal be the only conversation that you're having with your learner in high school.
Oh my gosh, right?
And sometimes we don't let parents go into the online portal anymore. We change.
I was going to say, what is your advice on that? There are some folks who say, don't ever look.
Don't ever look, or there has to be very firm ground rules about what day you can check or when you can check, or things like
that. Or
that.
You're checking together, or you're working with someone like us who is helping you step back so that your learner can step forward. One of the things that parents don't think about is when they make appointments for their kids, which we do as parents, right? But at a certain point, you need to ask your learner, are you available on that day, and start assigning them some responsibility.
Yeah.
Sports games. That's something, their sports schedule should be on their calendar. It should be on your calendar too, but they should be the one importing it and adding you to it and taking over those sorts of responsibilities. So giving your learner more control. This is only when they have the system in place. So we have to set kids up for success once they have these sort of baseline systems. We're a big fan of a weekly family meeting. Where
I love a family meeting set.
Where everybody talks about what's happening during the week, with the understanding that, yes, we talked on Sunday that you have a dentist appointment on Wednesday, and knowing that our learner is probably going to forget they have a dentist appointment on Wednesday, but we're building the skill. We're having the skill of executive functioning, the language of it, and having realistic expectations as we slowly hand it over, with the knowledge that our students will have executive functioning failures, just like we do. We double book ourselves sometimes, right? Like we're human, we forget. It could be on the calendar and we could forget, right? It's just part of being alive in the human experience, and it's about the recovery piece.
And what we often say is what we're teaching them is how to hold themselves up. That is the entire process of growing up. That's school, all the way learning how to hold yourself up once you get there, right? College is that in between where your parents are still holding you up some, but you're starting to hold yourself up some. So they're incrementally learning how to do it, but sometimes it is so much that they're not ready for it. So if they are ready for some of these things, letting them do it when they are younger, great, because you're building the muscle sooner and they'll have longer to hone in on what works for them. So honestly, it's really about helping them fall forward and know what they need to do in order to recover. And if that means that you show them what you do when you recover from something that happens, that's great, because they need those strategies, because we're always going to have to do that, because things happen.
Yeah, I think that that's right. And it's, one of the things that I hear from parents sometimes, and again, I'm a parent and I'm very empathetic. Sometimes students are finally identified with a learning disability, ADHD, autism, whatever it is, after, sometimes, especially if they're very academically able in certain ways, after a bunch of really rough time, some failures. And so understandably, parents are saying, well, but, Elizabeth's already had such a frustrating experience. I'm afraid if I step back, she's just going to fall apart. And then where are we? Do you have any response to the parents who feel like they can't let anything go because they've got to keep their kids, up where they are?
You don't jump from first floor to 10th floor.
Mm-hmm.
This is a staircase, one step at a time.
Yeah.
That's the only way to learn how to be successful. It's not all or none. It's not black and white. It has to be, what are the steps we need to take to get there? And we don't move on to the next step until that step is actually built.
It's what we talk about on the podcast with productive struggle. It's about finding that zone of appropriate struggle that will lead into something that is productive.
It's called the zone of
we have great
zone
episodes
of proximal development. Yep.
Right.
We have great episodes with Dr. Rishi Sriram where he talked to us about that concept. But that is where being strategic, not being a black and white thinker, and sort of understanding that the human experience is 2 steps forward, sometimes 3 steps back, but 2 steps forward, and eventually you'll make it to the top of the staircase.
Yeah. And I just also want to caution, I know that there's a lot of friction with parents about things that work for you might not work for your learner. And oftentimes there's the most friction is that the child is identifying with the other parent, and the one that, oh, I was so good at this, or this is so easy for me, or I never had a struggle with this, or I don't understand why you can't do X, Y,
or this
Z.
Is my husband.
Right?
When they call us, you're like, this kid is my husband. And I'm like, okay, but your husband's doing well now, right? He's doing fine. But he has an assistant. So he has great. Like
he knows who he is. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right.
So
that's
important. I think that's an important part of it as well.
Is recognizing your own triggers in it, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah. You said so many smart things. So I just want to let you know, and anybody watching this later to know, and I will put this in the YouTube comments. I have dropped a bunch of books in here. So because as the women were talking, I was thinking, so Gift of Failure by Jessica Lahey is a really important book to read about being comfortable letting things happen. Self-Driven Child by Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson about becoming a consultant. Exactly what you said, becoming a consultant rather than a manager. Sunday meeting, Attitude Magazine has a great link about having a Sunday meeting. And so exactly what Rachel was talking about, sitting down once a week and looking forward, talking about and that is a habit I try to get my students into, is starting the week by looking at what's coming up, all that, what was it? Plan and scan? Stephanie?
Scan and plan, I think I said.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also we cannot leave this conversation without talking about the book, Outsmart Your Brain by Daniel Willingham, written for college students, exactly about how to learn, how to take notes, how to prepare for exams. And again, ladies, you always say the right things. Learning is effortful, right? Learning is it's not going to be easy. And so, at this time of year when this conversation is happening, it's April, students are getting their college acceptances. I have College Readiness Week going on my social media channels for this specific reason. College is a lot of work for everybody. And I had a parent kind of criticize my saying this, but look, college is an exciting opportunity. It can be a great experience if you are ready for it. But let's not sugarcoat it. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of reading, and often things that don't interest you. And so all of the stuff we have talked about today, right? About motivation.
And it's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
College isn't going anywhere. So if your learner needs that time, that's good. That's good. Give them that time to develop and breathe. It's not unstructured time. So what we're talking about is that gap year. It's not just like they're going to stay at home and sleep till noon. No, they're going to be working. They've got something that they are doing, and colleges actually really like it when students have taken that gap year time. So we have an episode. I don't know if it's come out or it will be coming out, but we have a gap year expert that's coming on the podcast to talk about like the ultimate fear of taking a gap year is that they'll never go back. They won't do it. They'll get like a taste of the real world. It's just not true. It's just not what the data is showing us. They do go, and they're more productive, vibrant, ready members of their communities.
And also on my YouTube channel is there are, I think, 2 or 3 chats with my friends Jason and Jane Soroyan of J2 Guides, where they specifically talk about gap year experiences for students with learning disabilities, ADHD, questions to ask, and talk a lot about the growth that they often see. And it doesn't have to be an expensive experience that students have. Maybe they work with an educational therapist over that time, and they, take a community college class to sort of get in that mode. But again, the whole point of having these professionals on with me today is to talk about starting this process well ahead of college, and really starting to think in high school about what supports are being provided, what your students can start to get strategies to do on their own. So ladies, to wrap this up, any last thoughts about this, things you want to say to parents?
I just have tremendous compassion when there's executive functioning stuff going on in the household. It's extremely frustrating, but it's also frustrating for your learner. They don't want to be in conflict with you about this as well. And it doesn't have to be ed therapy. Yes, it's a long game, but it doesn't have to be a forever sentence. I would say that if you're coming into ed therapy as an 11th grader or a 12th grader, you should expect that you're working with your ed therapist through that first semester, realistically, of college. But these students who struggle with executive functioning skills are also so creative and ready for the workforce, because that's the deep underlying fears that they're not going to be able to make money for themselves, right, and support themselves. Those are the people I want to hire. So because of the creative problem solving and the solutions, but they do need to show up on time. So it's the world has opened up to these type of learners in a way that this is like the perfect time. We understand who they are and we want to hire them. So
Stephanie?
I was just gonna say, give everybody some grace and get curious.
Yeah,
like give yourself some grace when you're getting frustrated. Give them some grace that they're not doing this to you on purpose. And get curious about why it's happening, and talk about how everybody can get some support so that you guys don't have to be in a place where it starts to damage relationships and you can't recover. So that's my biggest advice.
Are you ladies available at 1 a.m. when students are trying to finish their papers last minute?
No.
So that's something to keep in mind.
That's a hard no.
Yeah. So the educational therapist isn't necessarily there to help you all the way through the paper. It's to get you organized about getting your paper done.
Elizabeth, don't think that our like high school and college students don't reach out to us at those hours, because they do.
Yeah.
And then we text them back the next day. It's just the goal is to build. The goal is that those moments should be happening with less frequency. Unless you were a learner, like I always say, I wrote my thesis in college between the hours of 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. So it was productive, it was quiet. And so, but I wasn't reaching out to people to help me at that time. So, but we're not available. No, we will not be logging on.
Well, ladies, thank you so much. I will make sure that the link to your different practices are in the comments here. Folks can reach out to Stephanie and to Rachel with their questions. Yes, they do provide remote therapy. Learn Smarter podcast. It's just awesome. And get their weekly emails. Are they weekly? Can't keep track anymore. But there is, the more preparation your student has, the more independent they are while they're in high school. For me, what's so important is they're going to go to college with a sense of self-efficacy. They will have strategies and systems and calendars and planners in place that they know work for them, and that will reduce their stress going into that environment. Ladies, thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
are we going to have your closing tagline?
Have a great week, Smarties.
Have a great week, Smarties.
Thanks, ladies. Have a great week, everybody.